You know, when poker decides that it's your turn to lose, there's not a lot you can do about it. You can't force a losing session to become winning. But what you can do is not combust entirely, not make your losses worse than they need to be. And over the long run, if you lose less than your fellow regs do when you're running bad, that's just as good as winning more when you're running good, or just being a better poker player. In the session you're about to watch, you're going to see me get smashed a bit. I really struggle to string together winning hands in the session, but I try and demonstrate the positive, long-term, focused attitude that you just simply need to have to make it in this game. Before we get into the video, a quick announcement. A bit of an annoying announcement to have to make, to be honest, and I'm sorry about what I'm about to say. The subscription service that was going to be launching on March 1st is no longer going to be launching on March 1st. There are a few delays behind the scenes, and even more importantly, I want to make sure that we have a bunch of content, not just my new True EV series on how to find the right play in every spot, but also the quality content from our other professional poker players and coaches that we have taken on. I want that to be good to go on launch. I want it to be loads of videos for you to get your teeth into. And so we're going to push it back and make sure that that's the case. We'll be launching no later than the end of March, I hope. And we will be coming at you with an exact launch date very soon. If you're mad at me about that, if you wanted it to launch sooner, don't worry. You can get your revenge by watching me getting beat up in this session. Let's get to it. Guys, just take a look at this avatar. Isn't it grotesque? This is my latest one, and it's actually even worse if you could see the full image, because there are other really fat carrot people in the background playing some kind of fat carrot only MTT, only for the really obese carrots. And it's a grim sight. So, we're locked into this theme now. We've gone with the obese beast. We've had to keep the carrot theme going as well. Every avatar is more grotesque than the last. And we are off in a 2-table 100 Russian cash challenge session here, exclusive to YouTube. Let's see what kind of spots we can get into. So I have an open here. This is a normal looking reg player, 23-18, 50 attempt to steal, 8% 3-bet. Normal stuff. You can cold call, you can 3-bet, lots of stuff you can do. Whenever I turn on the camera, we just have to flop a set. People are like, why do you only show us hands that you win? Like, I can't help it. Like, I press record and I start running it. But anyway, we're going to be playing small bets on this flop. There are some really good reasons for this. So if you think about the way our range is interacting here, over here, we're just going to cold for this. Unfortunately, no action with the sevens. It's cold 4-bet fold spot, ace queen suited against cutoff and button. This is a little bit later. We can actually go cold 4-bet call, but I don't think we can go cold 4-bet call here. People are not really in love with finding jams against cold 4-bets with things like jacks and tens in general, so going to just be planning to fold to shove here. Bunch of hands going on. I want to talk though about that hand with the sevens in just a second and explain why 4-betting is normal, but let me play these spots. So this actually gets flatted, and I want to just start with really small here. Over here, we're going to be check calling this board pretty much always with ace-9. This actually takes it down, so not much else to say. Back over here, yeah, check raise with this hand, just a little bit of a stretch. It's a very good call hand. The jack turn is unfortunate in mass data. We see turn cards like this just result in less bluffing. I don't even think you necessarily need mass data. The process of compiling millions of hands and looking at stats to be able to predict that. And this spot in the river, you shouldn't really block any sizing, I don't think. Although the speed of the turn check's interesting, but I think what's going on here is that there's a bit too much pocket pair being turned into bluff, shows what I know. So that combo just chose to check back. But if that player is a more aggressive reg, I think that they will be potentially in danger of over-bluffing with specifically that region, the underpair region. So when you're in a spot where you think your opponent may well over-bluff, man, this is all action. We get cold 4-bet here with ace-queen, hijack, cutoff, button. It's really small. We're definitely going to be peeling this one. Although we're never in love with these spots in this pool, but I don't think we're ever folding ace-queen suited here. Over there on the left, we're in one of these situations where if we block small, it's an okay line to bet like, 5th pot or 6th pot or even smaller. But in practice, I think the amount of overbluffing that happens if you check there is just extreme. I think people are landing on the river with too much nothing and probably overdoing the underpair on average there. We're actually meant to play quite a bit of raise with ace-queen on this node in GTO, and the reason for that is that Villain actually has a really mergy range here of like kings and queens and jacks at a higher frequency than we do, and we're meant to try and do stuff about that by actually building the more polarized raising range on the flop, because we actually lack the combos of queens and kings compared to them. We will just call here. I think it's fine, and I think just calling and calling river is probably a better line than jamming turn, because I don't think there are really any high equity bluffs here at all. So I'm going to call and then check call river. The villain is value betting thinly enough here. Ace queen should be jamming for sure, because ace king in our shoes is jamming pre. So we have what's called a value chopper, where we're chopping with value bets. And of course, we're just beating bluffs. We're just beating king jack and king queen and king 10. There is some mass data stuff going around that tells people to triple really light here. So yeah, we may just run into ace king on this node, but equally, we're going to run into a lot of other stuff too. So that's about as hard of a cooler as you can get in a 4-bet pot. It's about as much of a setup as you can get with ace queen there. So unfortunate, but we move to the next hand. And when you're getting stacked in that kind of way, you'll note that throughout the hand, we're trying to be really methodical. All the time we're aware that we could be getting stacked, but we're almost making peace with the worst case scenario before it happens, rather than being like, oh God, is this just ace king, or should we call down here? We're kind of coming to the logical conclusion that we're not going to be folding there. And why? In a logical way, so that, when we do see that showdown, we're not getting as destabilized by it. We're not starting to think, oh no, like, should we have hero folded at some point or anything like that. Okay, so we have ace king here. I'm going to start with a bet for the simple reason that generally against humans, this just goes well with hands like this. This is not a hand that's overly robust on a lot of runouts, so we're actually going to be forced to fold to turn probes at a decent frequency on a decent amount of turn cards here. I think betting is just a superior play. Turn in equilibrium is going to be mostly bet with a little bit of check. In real life, I think just going for value here makes a ton of sense. On these turn cards, where your opponent's hitting a lot of 2-pair combos and things like that, you're probably going to be using B75 rather than overbet. But I think you can build some overbet there if you want as well. With ace king specifically, I think I prefer the B75 line. Ace 9 here and jack 4-4, the first thing to note about these spots is that you're not going to be folding to a c-bet. Doesn't really matter what size the c-bet is, you're not going to be folding. Raising is something I do with some smaller ace-x of spades here, right? So like ace 5, ace 3 of spades, you can start building some raise. 8-4, really close, but I think against 2.2, you're going to want to peel there. It's obviously a completely dead flop for us. And over here, like, the turn strat's not so clear. Like, there's going to be some ace-x that needs to call again on this node. This is also a node I think people are going to be pretty aggressive. So on this node, there's a ton of natural-looking bluffs, flush draws, straight draws, 2 overcards, things like that. Ace 9, I guess we will fold this one, but I would lean towards that being overbluffed by a reg player if you made me guess. Over here with absolutely nothing, it's a punt to bet turn, so unless you think your opponent's like really overfolding this node, and I don't think that's really the case on ace 10-9, I think it's a much more showdown value geared range. You don't really want to be leading with absolute junk. That should be kind of obvious because out of position when you have a range disadvantage, you just don't want to do that. Here, our range is actually not great. Like, villain's range is still doing a bit better than ours, but when we have a hand like this in the real world, I think specifically leading for like a block size is going to be plus EV, and checking is of course going to be 0 EV. So this bet needs 25% fold equity. You're risking 1 into what is eventually going to be 4, right? So if this bet just works 25% of the time, you're already printing in the spot. If it works more than that, I should say. And the reason it does work more than that against humans is that in order to meet the defense frequency, the MDF of like 75% there, you've either got to check back semi-protected, more protected than people tend to do, or you've got to find bluff raises on the river. And part of your defense quota actually comes from bluff raising the river there. Some comes from value raising, some comes from calling, but some comes from bluff raising the river. And if people are not going to be checking back protected enough, and are not going to be bluff raising the river at enough of a frequency, we're going to be doing really well in this spot. So this is mid-afternoon now. This pool's beginning to get a bit more recreational infested. I think call is the best play with 6-5 here. I think it's just better than fold and better than squeeze. At this stack depth, it's a little awkward. It's not really the SPR we want to squeeze at against this player with this hand. I'd rather squeeze a bit more linear and like big card oriented here. Queen 10, we're just going to be folding cutoff button. Reasonable flop. So if this checks to us, we can expect fold equity to be pretty decent. This player needs to be aware, of course, that like this is the pre-flop raiser. They do snap check, which I'm not going to read too much into, but if anything, I would interpret it as a positive sign. So I think betting here is likely the best play. I think check is all right in theory, obviously, but I think betting in practice here is likely the best play after the snap checks. So I'm going to go for this sizing, and this is similar to the 7s, which I said I would touch on. When you're betting a range that's very thin value protection oriented, you don't want to be using a big sizing. Now that we're betting a range on the turn that's very thick value oriented, we can have two sizes here. We can bet 10x for some kind of smaller size, and we can bet this hand for a bigger size, and we can construct in that kind of way. I am just going to go for the overbet here with this hand and put this into my like sets and straights nutted kind of region. This bet's probably going to overperform for fold equity, which is a little bit annoying, but it's not clear that like a smaller sizing does better, because I think all sizes on the 4 of hearts turn after that flop action are going to be a bit overfolded, to be honest. So I think it's just a good spot for bluffing in general. And when you're dealt your value region in a good spot for bluffing, what's going to happen is that you just make a bit less money. And when you're dealt your air combos, you don't do as badly as those are like supposed to do, basically. That's how to understand that. There are some spots where a part of your range just gains EV and another part loses EV. So King 9, we would be 3-betting blind versus blind at a really high frequency. And the way to understand this is just that it's a hand that benefits a ton from fold equity. Whether it's better or worse hands that we actually make fold pre-flop isn't that important, because pre-flop is such a running close equity spot, right, where equities run so close together. You really need to be thinking about it in terms of, am I denying significant equity to both better and worse hands? And with King 9, you definitely are. You block some 4-bets. And most crucially, you know, the hand doesn't do amazing by calling. Going to go ahead and 3-bet the 6s over here. Jack turn, not the best. This is a spot where I still think there's plenty of barrels that we win against. I think there are some very loose fish just betting randomly here with any king, any ace, like stuff like this sometimes. We're taking the worst of it here, but 3-1 with fairly nutty straight draw, we're not going to be folding. Over here, we're going to go ahead and bet very small on these textures. Just kick things off with a tiny bet, very difficult thing to defend against on these very wet, kind of polarizing boards. Getting raised here, a bit unusual, definitely something that sets off alarm bells, but of course, with 6s and with a spade, we're going to be calling. And on this run out, because it is blind versus blind, I think there's going to be enough bluffing for us to call here. It's not ideal on 3 flush. There are some markers that make us want to fold, but I think this is slightly winning, probably. We're needing something like 29-30% equity to call there. I think we'll do all right. We do lose this time to King Queen. And over here we face another bet. So getting put into some pretty tricky spots here. It's not so clear what the bluffing range is actually supposed to be in this case. Like, it's probably meant to be some offsuit stuff with a spade and some other stuff as well. This hand looks super indifferent now. Just because I think people are under-aggressing with this line, I'm going to fold here. This is not ideal, but we are dead against some of villain's range. We're dead against boats now. We're dead against flushes already, and our redraw's pretty thin against other stuff. It's possible there's a lot of merges there too, like 10s with a spade, jacks with a spade, stuff that's also just annihilating us. So I think our hand, despite being like pair and redraw, does pretty badly on that node against pool. Getting raised to that sizing on flop and then barreled on turn, I just can't see that being anything but an underbluffed situation. So folding looks pretty good, but this is definitely a session where we're getting put through a little bit of excruciation, because we're just getting put into spots that are like unpleasant. You know, we're getting 3-bet when we open, we're getting no fold deck, we're running into the top of people's ranges when we bluff catch, we're getting coolered in 4-bet pots, that kind of thing. And your session is going to go that way. And I think it's important for content creators to show sessions like this as well, and not just show all the smooth sailing that's so easy and fun to talk about. So Queen Deuce, very bottom of rangey, going to be pitching here. But yeah, the call down against the small blind range is basically based on the fact that small blind is just a very wide position, where if you call down enough times there, you just see enough bluffs on most textures. When there's 3 or 2.5 broadways, like on a Jack 10-9 board, and when the flush comes in the river, it's for sure worse. Like, for sure worse. And Grady is going to say, well, that's less overbluffed than the normal big blind versus small blind triple. But because it's a whalish looking guy with like a 43 VPIP, and because it is a really wide starting range, I still don't want to fold any of my bluff catchers, even though a lot of the conditions are worse than usual. So that's the ethos behind that call down. 6-5 deuce. If this is a really weak player, you can start c-betting here. Otherwise, you should be checking range and then just proceeding normally, right? But if you are against a range that's way too wide in this spot, easy fold against the big bet, you can start c-betting and actually just gaining more fold equity than you're meant to get and stuff like that. King 9-8, you can for sure bet with 6s. Check's okay as well. Just check there without really paying it too much thought. In terms of what better hands fold if we start blasting here, the answer is not terribly many. Over 2 streets, there are some, but I think we can start bluffing here with just like ace-x and maybe 3s, because the river was going to be a 3, maybe 4s. I think 6s is just going to be checking. And we're going to check down here with a decent amount of pot share against ace-high, 5s, 4s, etc. And if villain has 7s plus, fold equity is minimal. 7s might fold, but that's about the only hand. So yeah, just an example of a spot where your hand is entitled to not very much of the pot, but betting and risking extra money is lower EV than checking and taking the pot share that you have. That's the best way to understand why you don't bet at any point there. And I know some of this sounds a bit basic, guys, but just bear with me. I'm pitching this video at all kinds of levels. It's a slow, methodical play and explain. I want to be thorough with all of my thoughts in these spots. 3-betting ace-queen offsuit here, small blind versus button. And don't forget, guys, the subscription service at Carrot Corner. our video library with content from me, my True EV series, which is all about how to find the right play in the real world, how to play against the pool in a way that's super accurate in every important spot. We use a bit of solvers in that course, not to copy them, but to actually illustrate where people are going wrong and how we can take advantage. But we also spend a bunch of time reviewing hands from this challenge, really getting into the zone. Hi YouTube, it is YouTube this time. It might not have been though, it could have been Carrot Corner, because we're also recording a bunch of footage for Carrot Corner as well. Although that tends to be a bit more prepared and rehearsed and polished. It's not so much live play in there. But yeah, there's going to also be another coaching series on Carrot Corner pretty soon, where I'm going to select a student and take them all the way through the game. And besides that, another thing you have to look forward to is content from a bunch of our other coaches, professional poker players, in some cases high stakes pros that have either taken Carrot Corner content to get them started back in the day, or they've just got in touch since then and said they'd like to work for Carrot Corner. So got some content from some high stakes players and some, you know, Carrot Corner people that you may know from the streams and stuff, coaches and pros making content as well. So loads to look forward to. That's the 1st of March onwards, and that is our subscription service. So checking back here with Ace King of Diamonds, a pretty normal play. This is a high VPIP player, and when I'm against a player like this, check back turn and call river is going to be a really good line. And the reason for that is that, again, they're just going to land with a lot of stuff. Obviously, this river we're going to be value betting and calling or value raising. When they riffle chips, and this is a legit thing, they are stronger than normal. This is a pattern that I'm pretty confident in. It's very unusual for someone to riffle chips and then bluff here. This guy is probably going to check call at a higher frequency now that he has riffled chips. So I'm actually going to overbet here and make quite a big overbet, because the chip riffle check line is way more likely to be like ace 5 that feels comfortable and confident enough to play with chips by clicking an emote button. So this overbet, it might not always be called, but I just think there's a higher chance than usual that this is now getting called. Because if you just have air, the riffle of the chips in the check is just a bit less likely to happen. So these sort of things, don't worry guys, this isn't what you're paying me for. You know, if you sign up to Carrot Corner, we tend to get involved in a few more technical aspects of the game than that. But you get the point, right? We're trying to interpret what that means from a recreational player. What does it mean when they press an emoji button? What's the psychology of that? And it could be lots of things. It could be that they're weak and they're trying to get us to not bluff. It could be all kinds of things, but by and large, it will reflect a higher degree of relaxation than average. And therefore, I think your fold equity goes down a little bit. I'm not saying I would never bluff the river there or anything like that, but I just think we get called a bit more often after that action. So kind of interesting, right? These things all matter. Like live tells matter. This isn't live, but there are kind of pseudo live tells online, like timing and people playing with chips and saying things to you and stuff like that. I don't pretend to be a complete expert in that field, but I do have certain opinions about what these things mean on average. And those opinions are backed by many, many years of playing this game and just sort of getting how humans tick, right? How recreational players tick. If you can understand how your recreational opponents are thinking, it puts you at a big advantage because you can maximize your exploits against those players. And that's where a lot of your money is going to come from. I think Queen Jack on this board against half pot is actually okay to float with. And that's because people in general are c-betting too often. And it's also because we're getting 3-1 in position and because the pair draw quality is pretty high. So I don't think that hand's going to be a pure fold to half pot. Bluffing now seems reasonable. We can make some smaller bets here. We can make some bigger bets here. I think most of our betting range is 7x plus, so I'm usually just going to pick this sizing. If this gets called, we need to really think about the range that plays this way, because this is now like quite a specific spot. Gone ahead and peeled the flop there. That's a spot you need to be careful. If you fold flop there with that hand at 3-1, blind versus blind, in a pool where people are c-betting way too often, that board is basically a range check in GTO, right? Like GTO's going to say small blind should basically never bet that node. And if they do, it should be like a 21% range that's really selective and blah, blah, blah. So given people are just betting randomly there a lot of the time, your hand is a hell of a better call than it is in theory. And I think in theory, it's actually an okay call. It's on the cusp of breaking even at least. So going to be peeling flop there. 7-3 actually performs kind of badly multi-way. Like it's so junky and dominated even when it hits that it's just not like having 7-6. It's just not quite there. This spot is tempting with ace-9. I think with ace-10, I'm definitely 3-betting. I think ace-9's a little bit too light. But you do want to get involved way wider there against recreational players. One position to the left or slightly, you know, one pip up there with a kicker. And I think we're going to be 3-betting that one. 5-4, we can 3-bet this every so often. I don't think this is a recreational player either. So yeah, what you're witnessing here is just a session where we're kind of struggling to get anything going in terms of winning pots. And these sessions, it's very important, possibly more important when you're running like this to really focus and play well and make sure your mental game is good than it is when you're running good and you're going to have an easier time of having a strong mental game. So during downswings, whether they're extended or just session long downswings like this, where we just can't really win many hands, you just want to accept that, you know, you may well have a losing session. This is likely to be a losing session now. And that's fine, because like a bunch of our sessions are losing. Like 40-something% of our sessions are going to be losing. This queen 5 over here, man, like, it's very tempting. It's probably just about a fold in GTO, but against 2.5, it's really not too bad. King 9, 3-bet or call, both plays totally fine. Again, the idea being, I can't find a respectful emote fast enough. I was going to be like, hurry up. That wasn't something appropriate. Good luck, Carrot Man. Hurry up. The guy's already folded to my 3-bet. But yeah, you get the point, right? You can fold out better hands and worse hands, both of which contain loads of equity against you. And most crucially, calling is not massively good, such that if you 3-bet and get 4-bet, you're squandering a really good calling hand. These are the conditions for 3-betting out of the big blind with some kind of semi-junky offsuit hand. You need to just make sure that you love fold equity and you're not doing amazing by calling. And as long as those two things are true, you can go ahead and 3-bet. If you have a hand there, like Queen 8 suited, you don't 3-bet that blind versus blind, because although you are cleaning up a lot of equity by getting fold equity, your hand is doing too well by calling. But in this node here, the reason Queen 9 suited can be one of my bluffs is that I'm not doing that well by calling against the cutoff range. It's not like I'm in position blind versus blind. My hand is faring a lot worse. It's dominated more. It's getting fold equity by more dominating hands than in the other situation. And so this is going to be okay. Ace 9 against 3x here, you can probably pitch this, but because it's a rec player, we are going to take a flop. This is thin, but I think the skill edge is going to make up for it against a rec player. Against a reg, you're not going to be able to implement a lot of skill edge with a hand like Ace 9. Going to fold to the c-bet here. But yeah, I think taking a flop there is, it's break-even-ish, right? But it might be marginally better than not. Pocket aces here. I want to go very small with my 3-bet. The reason being I want this player to jam or call as often as possible. I basically just want to discourage fold equity pre-flop without going 3 or 4 away. So just like a small 3-bet is good. Kind of awkward when he goes 3x. It's hard to give the illusion that you're 3-bet folding, but it probably just doesn't matter. Pocket 10s over here. Here you want to either go really tiny or check. I don't actually mind in this spot. I think really tiny is fine. And over here, we're going to start with a check against a rec player, a very key skill. You do not want to be betting here. Unfortunately, they do not take the bait. That's going to happen sometimes. Again, try not to be results oriented. Try not to fall into the trap of being like, man, it looked so baity, it was obvious I had it, or something like that. There might be people who think that way, but usually that's not what's going on. And we're obviously check calling with 10s. Our hand is robust. We talk about this in Carrot Poker School. We're surviving pretty well against bluffs here. Age Meister from Holland, 34 VPIP. Is this a... This just looks like a reg that's been pretty loose so far. Going to keep check calling with 10s for now. Not going to love life against the bet here, but we're not going to be folding. Going to fold here. I'm just engaged in another hand. And yeah, Ace Jack off is kind of just able to do anything in that spot. It's very close to being able to 4-bet or call or fold. It doesn't really matter. A villain checks back. Do we want to block river? I don't think so. I think I want to check with this hand and start blocking around King Jack. I don't want to lose extra money to a Jack that I don't need to lose. And I think just check calling in an overbluff node there is just better. So just going to go for check on river. King 9. So this is the spot I was talking about earlier. This player could well be recreational. And I have the kind of hand here that I actually don't mind barreling on quite a lot of runouts, right? There's a lot of runouts where I can just keep capitalizing on fold equity here, and probably more fold equity than I deserve. And I'm probably against a wider range pre than I should be. And if I check, I'm probably facing like quite a lot of bigger stabs than I should. And therefore just like I'm not realizing equity as well as in GTO by checking in real life. So that's why I just like to go ahead and bet 60% pot there. I think it's very reasonable. So what we're seeing is we're slogging through, we're fighting through bad variance. This video is going to be called something like how to battle through bad variance. And we can do battle axes and swords and shields. And for a kid that grew up playing a load of like RPGs, that's just, what else could you want, guys? You know, what more could you want than me with a sword and a shield on the thumbnail? Does that not just get you clicking? Does that get you subscribing to Carrot Corner? Does it get you smashing the like button? If you haven't done that, by the way, it does help me. Go ahead and smash it right now. Right now. You done it yet? I will only fold King 7. In fact, do I want to fold King 7? Yeah, I will fold King 7. I'll assume you've done that now. Can use quite a lot of big bets on 7-7-3 because we're just building around like good 3x plus. Villain has a monopoly on this board on like ace king, ace queen, like big cards like that. They're check calling king queen, king jack, king 10, ace 10, ace queen, etc. We have a monopoly on baby pairs, single pair, and trips. And so just using the big bet there is going to be the GTO choice. In the real world, I don't think there's a reason to really deviate from that. I think it's just also good there. So I don't copy solvers, guys, as you know. I don't do things just because solvers do them. I start with the solver plan and then I verify that I still want to do that in reality. Like here, for example, the solver plays probably range check on this board, 3-way. Do I want to deviate from that? Not really. I think this hand is just fine to keep checking. But so if I don't have a reason to do anything different, I'll just play normally. This player goes for a big sizing here, which is interesting. I think fold equity against a passive looking player who does this is fairly low here. So I think call's probably the main node. Raise is interesting though. Raise is interesting here. I think call is probably better. Super weird spot. Actually squeezed too small here because I was worried about timing down over here. Now bluffing is quite interesting. Like most of our range is going to be, we do beat all of villain's air here. The question is like, how often do they just have nines and stuff like that? I think they have those kind of hands really often. This really depends on like how well villain can hand read. I don't know. I only have 5 seconds to decide. I'm going to check, but I do expect to lose to like nines exactly and stuff. You have fives. It's super annoying. What I need to remember in these spots is on flop, like people are just merging really heavily. So like check razor, which is the fine play in theory, is probably also fine in practice. Just because they've bet big like that. Like, yeah, okay, a GTO strategy is going to be highly polarized there. And it's not going to have a lot of hands like fives in it. But these people, they're not aware of how to build. And so like check raising a flop there could well be the best play. It could be. I think check call is all right as well. And I think on river, like going for a really big bet's interesting because there is a lot of like sort of 7s, 8s, 9s, 5s kind of stuff going on there. That's a big part of my opponent's strategy. In real life, the problem is I don't want to go massive because when they have river to queen, it's obviously snapping me. But bluffing some size on that river, I think boats are quite prone to underfolding, and that's why I didn't. I think people with a pocket pair there are just going to underfold. Just basically the fish community is going to underfold the absolute hand strength of full house. And that kind of sucks for me, right? And that's why I decided to play the hand that way on the river, and we also do win against air stabs that are still giving up. So I think river's probably a check. Flop check raise, though, could be important. In hand there, I was a little bit guilty of not really thinking enough about what people's true strategy is. So 10-10-9 is the kind of board where under the gun, this is actually getting pretty grim. On a paired board, you're meant to call most pairs in GTO. Now, the thing is, with like fairly aggressive players like this who are under the gun, they're going to be barreling at an incredibly high frequency if I call here, right? So if you call here with 3s against button, it's totally fine, and they have a ton of air, and they have low equity bluffs, and all of that. The problem against under the gun is that very many of our opponent's bluffs are just really, really big cards that are just going to either be straight draws that are betting turn, or they're going to be super live because the board can double pair and stuff like that and counterfeit us. And there's just way more ways we can lose the hand against under the gun, because under the gun just has way more bigger cards and bigger pairs and less random air hands that are inclined to give up. So you're going to face a give up really infrequently when you call a c-bet against under the gun player compared with when you call a c-bet against the button range. And therefore, reacting with 3s there on flop, it's not so simple as you just call the small bet on the paired board. You have to think about how bad your equity realization, your EQR as it's called, is going to be later, and it's going to be really bad. And against a human, it may be worse than in theory because people may be over barreling that spot. Your equity just sucks. And your EV sucks way worse. So even though we do have quote unquote the best hand at quite a high frequency on flop, it's our equity realization in that spot that's kind of the Achilles heel that makes folding, in my opinion, a pretty good idea on flop. King 7, you can peel, you can 3-bet this hand as a bluff. It doesn't hate turning itself into a bluff at all. I don't really have a big preference. This player is unknown. I think just checking is the default strategy. GTO is just going to lead big or not at all here. It's going to be the way it goes. In reality, I can't fathom why my hand would have enough equity that I want to start like leading for value. River just looks like a bread and butter block. Villain's range is very unlikely to bluff now because people are bad at turning pocket pairs into a bluff in this pool. In this spot, now I know that's a bit opposite of what I said earlier, but I don't think this is a regular. I thought the last guy was. I think this is a recreational player. So I am actually just going to block bet against the likes of queens, jack X, the same hand apparently, that kind of thing. Now this spot over here is quite interesting. 8-6 deuce, you know, you can check back here 3-way, but 3-way I actually value denying equity a bit more, and my hand is like a 5-out powerhouse redraw kind of implied odds harvester. An implied odds harvester, love it, new term. So for that reason, I think just betting against 2 rec players with a hand that can become huge and can win big pots and also cleans a ton of equity by betting and getting useful folds is a good idea. If you like the content, let me know in the comments what you think of it. Happy to make more live plays like this. Just to reiterate, we have the subscription service coming really soon. We have the series True EV by me that I've been putting a ton of work into, making sure it's slick and polished and awesome. And we also have content from loads of other coaches. We have coaching formats, we have hand review, we have theory, we have mental game presentation stuff on mindfulness and all of that. We're trying to tick all boxes. 3 videos per week, $49.99 a month. And don't forget, there'll be a new coaching series starting at some point on Carrot Corner as well. So if you like the content here, way more coming to you on carrotcorner.com from March 1st onwards. So villain builds a donk here. I say builds a donk. He's a recreational player, right? So happens to donk here. Very easy call with ace jack with the back door. Call a couple of streets, see what happens. A lot of this leading range will be air. Some of it will be good hands, but much of it will be air. I'm going to check back ace 3 here. I feel like my hand is just like fine for bluff catch. Actually, no, I'm going to bet this particular hand. This hand is just super keen to get fold equity. I think ace jack just check back and call river is a good play against the rec here. 10 river's not ideal because it hits a bunch of the air. We'd rather river was like another 4 or something, but yeah, just going to check down. Losing to a 5 here, or 6s or 7s relatively often, but winning maybe 30-40% of the time here with the ace jack. Nice. And checking turn now. With ace 3, we have got the protection that we wanted. We've got a little bit of thin value, and that's now run out. We're going to be building a more polarized turn betting strat. So checking back here. The thing that recreational players will do on river that they shouldn't is turn ace-x into a bluff. When they pot it, things are a lot worse than normal. Like the pot sizing kind of hurts us. But apart from 4-5 in pocket 6s, this is the thin value range. So I'm going to peel against an aggressive looking player here. They just have the immortal nut. So pot is a sizing that we're very... not afraid of, I don't want to say that, but we're very hesitant to hero it. But the reason we called there is that so many flop calls had bricked and we've only bet small on flop. We've minimally filtered. So even though we have this data point, it's a pot size bet and we hate calling those compared to calling smaller bets. We just do way, way worse. We still think the texture in the environment is decent enough for us to call. And if you're calling river properly, your 1 at showdown stat should drop. You should be losing a bunch more money by calling river. Because you win more than your pot odds if you're making good calls, but you still lose more than 50% of the time. And that's the key. You should be calling river in spots where you usually lose if you're playing good poker. So when I call that river, I usually lose. I lose more than I win, but I think I win more than a third of the time still. Now, if my opponent picks some other sizing, like a not very good sizing, like half pot, they need to bluff almost never compared to their value region. They're going to be way over bluffing and I'm way happier. But I still think I'm happy playing that hand as a river call, for sure. And when you're running bad and losing by calling river, you've got to remind yourself that it's not always that way. It's a board we can lead in theory. I think leading this hand isn't the best. I think now we just have a ton of fold equity in this spot. I'm going to go up for slight overbet here. Now my hand doesn't have particularly nutty outs in this spot, but because I lose the pot so often by checking, either by facing a bet and folding, and sometimes I fold the best hand, or just by losing against ace-x, or by getting bluff caught on river, the turn lead against the overly capped range there for a slight overbet sizing is going to perform really well, right? So we just want to do that. Battling through tough variance. This is how to battle through a bad session, and you've got to be able to do this. You have 3 options when you're in a session like this. You have 3 ways that you can go. You can either fall apart entirely and start punting and making loads of mistakes and getting annoyed, and that's natural, that happens sometimes, but you've got to try and become aware of it and work on it. We're going to have material about that on Carrot Corner. Or you can actually end up just stopping your session and running away from playing poker and retreating into not playing anymore. And that's not very good either. Or the optimal way to go is obviously to manage your mental state, keep battling through it anyway. And this is me showing you how to keep a level head, hopefully. So let me know what you think of the content. I'm going to wrap it up now. This pot probably won't become anything. No, it's not going to become anything. And we're not even going to peel with the fairly dead hand. And that'll do it for today. March 1st is the date. I'll be streaming a lot more. By the way, I'm streaming in the AM now. I'm doing a lot of that. Sometimes it's the PM. Myself and my boy Akshar Patel, one of our sort of crushers or coaches, very strong player, playing like 500, 1K these days. We've been coming at you with streams where we review my play, we look at pile solves, we find exploits, we really put the graft in. I'm trying to bring my game to as high a level as I can. I'm trying to unlock my A game for ramping up volume. after I've got the subscription service launched. And Akshar is sitting there with me, helping me, training together, practicing with studying. You can check out those streams at carrot_corner Twitch channel. For all of your theoretical stuff, it's the Carrot Poker School at carrotcorner.com. And there's some exploit stuff on there too. I'll see you soon for another video, guys. Much love, and bye for now.